been telling myself that I'm going to learn to drive every year for like the last 13 years, but it's only recently that I've actually taken any steps to make that happen. Hey guys, what's going on? I'm Aish Banaish, and in this video I'm just going to be talking to you about my experience learning to drive. So to give you guys some context, if you're unfamiliar with me or my channel, I'm 30, I'm autistic and I have ADHD, and I haven't had a driving lesson in like 13 years. I've been telling myself that I'm going to learn to drive every year for like the last 13 years, but it's only recently that I've actually taken any steps to kind of make that happen. Basically, to cut a short story, hopefully even shorter, back in 2012 I was 17, and so I just reached the age where you can learn to drive in the UK, and I started having driving lessons in a manual, but there was basically an incident issue, whatever, with my instructor. So I stopped learning to drive. I did have a couple of lessons with my dad, but I then moved to London, and moving to London meant that there was a lot less motivation to learn to drive because there's like TfL. But yeah, so I've been telling myself that I'm going to learn to drive every year since I've been here, but it just hasn't happened. So like I said, back in 2012 I was learning to drive manual, but I made the decision a few years ago to just learn to drive automatic in the hopes that it would just get me to get on with it. It didn't. So last summer I finally started making some steps to become a driver, and I booked my theory test. And I hadn't done any theory at this point. I just booked the test because having ADHD I need that deadline to do anything. So I booked the test and I just started banging out theory. I didn't actually bang it out at the speed I should have been banging it out at, because a week before my theory test I tried to move it, feeling like I wasn't ready. But there was no convenient time for me to move it to because my brother was going to visit from Singapore, and so I just went with it and just really tried to like knuckle down in that last week. And I feel like most of my learning happened in that last week. I didn't actually read the highway code at all until that last week. I'd just been doing practice questions because I was using an app, and I do think the app was very good and it helped, and I liked, you know, seeing my progress or whatever. But I think my management of the whole thing was just not very good. Anyway, I passed my theory. I did actually get to the stage of doing my theory back when I was 17, and I had booked my theory. The only reason I didn't do my theory is that at that point you needed both parts of your license, like the card and the bit of paper, and I'd thrown away the bit of paper because I just thought it was like the paper your bank card comes stuck to. I didn't think it was important. So I then just didn't do my theory, which maybe is a blessing in hindsight because it would have been expired, but maybe it also would have motivated me to get the driving done. I don't know. For me, I think what actually made me take that step to even book my theory or do anything was that I just stopped listening to other people, because everyone was saying like, oh, your theory will be easier if you do it while you're learning to drive. But I am autistic and I am not very good at managing multiple things, and even just having driving lessons or like doing anything, everything else is gonna suffer a little bit. Like, genuinely, like right now I'm just doing lessons, I've done my theory, and shit is suffering. So because I know myself, I knew that it would be a lot easier for me to do one at a time, and so that's what I did. And I think that's the only reason I ever actually got my theory done, because I just did one at a time. And I think also the pressure of having done your theory and knowing that you only have 2 years to then pass your practical for that theory to still be valid kind of helps a bit, but I don't think it helps too much, because for me theory was like the easier bit. I'm very good at like tests and remembering things. It's just getting me to actually learn the things. Anyway, another motivation for me wanting to drive, and I think also why this all kind of happened at this time, is because my dad is now the only driver in my family. My mum didn't drive a lot, but she could drive. She had her own car. And now that my mum is not here and my older brother, who does drive, lives in Singapore, all the driving is basically on my dad. And I don't really like that. I also want to drive for my own independence and all of that stuff, but I think I've wanted to drive for my own independence for many years and thought about that. Whereas now, you know, I think it feels like it's not just about me. And like, my dad is retired and, you know, he's going to get older. And I think the kind of experience of losing a parent, even if it wasn't like from old age, has just kind of made me think like, oh, okay, I really need to look after my dad. But yeah, I did my theory in July 2024. It is currently February 2025, February the 26th, 2025. I didn't do any driving for the rest of 2024 because I passed my theory, then my brother came from Singapore, and then I was going on holiday, so it was just like, it wasn't going to happen. And then I had other things to focus on, like in the lead up to Christmas. But then I think actually like one of the biggest things that kind of spurred me was, one, turning 30. But two, actually the first video I put out again and just thinking like, you know, that didn't go as bad as I thought it would. and let me start doing stuff. I do think I've overdone it a bit, but you know, that's a story for another video. And I'd also booked a test, but not in London, because there are no tests available in London if you just go and look. But the test was in May, and because I know I am someone who, you know, leaves things for the last minute, I felt very much like I need to just get on it so that I'm not all rushing like at the last minute, and I'm not panicking and having excuses to cancel my test. But anyway, so I called this place that I'd kind of like penciled as like a potential place, or the probable place where I would learn to drive before, when I'd been looking like a few years ago, even though it had never actually happened. And I just like basically said, I want to learn to drive, I want to drive an automatic. And the woman on the phone was really helpful. And you know, like I also said like I'm autistic, and she was like, oh, my grandson is autistic. And I thought it was going to be like, oh, my grandson is autistic, but it wasn't that kind of my grandson is autistic. But like, you know, she got it. And she had a cancellation, so she managed to book me in that week with a woman, which was also what I wanted, but I'd forgotten to ask her for. So I had my first driving lesson on the 29th of January, and I was really nervous. I had brought 2 cushions with me, because you obviously can't see watching me on YouTube, but I am under 5 foot, and I know that I can't always see as much as I should be able to see in cars. So I brought 2 cushions with me, and when I was learning before, I needed cushions, so I knew it was probable that I'd need cushions. So yeah, I get in the car with my cushions, and I also get out a notebook, and now I think like I must have looked like such an idiot. But before, I'd been taking a notebook to my driving lessons, I think to write down theory or something. So I took a notebook. I actually left the notebook in her car, and I kind of was like, you know, I've left this impression of idiocy on her. But anyway, for my first lesson, she took me to a really quiet place where nothing is really going on. The only other moving cars I really saw were other learners, and we practiced pulling off and pulling up. And she was like, you know, you got that. And at this point, like in this lesson, I wasn't accelerating at all. Like when you're driving an automatic, the car drives just being in drive. So if you've not got your foot on the brake, it will move forward. It goes at a really slow pace, but I was scared to accelerate. And I think we also then, because I'd got pulling up and pulling off, we started left turns. Because this is a 2-hour lesson, so like if I've got that, I don't want to spend 2 hours pulling up and pulling off. So yeah, we started left turns, and with left turns basically, you know, it's easier because in the UK we drive on the left, and the left one is the easy one. They were going fine until I started to overthink it, and there were like some things that weren't like ideal. Like one of the left turns I was taking, there were 2 vans parked just in there, on like one on each side of the road, so I was trying to aim between them, and then like, you know, trying to turn at the right time, but then also go through those vans and undo my turn, like straighten out the wheel. It was a lot, but I realized then, and this is actually kind of a theme through my driving lessons, that it was the overthinking that kind of hindered me. Like my actual driving, my left turns were fairly fine until I started to overthink. And I think where I started to overthink was the steering, because you're not supposed to like cross your hands. And so I was trying to steer without crossing my hands, but then because the way she was telling me to turn the wheel, I'm not very quick at it, and I don't know why. Like it just doesn't work with my brain or whatever, or like I'm turning with one hand but not really doing anything with the other hand. And like I think I am like very right-handed. My left hand is fairly useless, and I think that is where I was basically trying to do all my turning power for all the turns with my right hand, and it just didn't come naturally to do things with my left hand. But also just even when I was doing things with my left hand, like I'm just not, I don't know how. She's like quick turns, and like my turns are just not quick enough. So I think, you know, I overthought my hand, but then I was overthinking steering enough, and then, you know, like if I had my hands right, I wasn't steering enough. If I did my hands how just felt natural to me, I was steering better, but not always enough, because it's my first time fucking doing turns. But yeah, my first lesson, like I left absolutely pumped. I felt really good about the fact that I picked up on stuff quite quickly, and I just, you know, like I was just excited to start driving. And so like I messaged her then for like, you know, lessons next week, and that's kind of where, you know, I just start having lessons. And basically because my test was not in London, I knew that if I booked an intensive course with this place, they will find you a test and it's included in the fee. It's a fucking bump, but I felt like it was worth it, right? Because she felt like, oh, you can maybe do your test at the end of March, right? So I'm making this video sort of halfway through, right? End of February, hopefully doing a test end of March. And to me, like, to be driving 2 months sooner, it was worth the bump, because I also know that if it was going till May, that would be like the only thing I'd really be able to focus on until May. But also I'd have to get another instructor in the other place where my test would have been, you know, so that I had a car to use. Because I do have a car waiting for me when I pass. It's my mum's car, and that's kind of like been the decision, although I may not actually use it straight away when I pass because it's a bigger car. But I wouldn't want to use that for my test. It doesn't have dual controls. I wouldn't even want to learn in it. Like, you know, I don't want to do that. But anyway, so I booked an intensive course with this place, and I'm saying this place because as much as like right now I feel like, oh, they're great, I want to be sure I think they're great before I you know, put that out there. But I also don't think YouTube is the greatest place to promote them anyway, because most of the people who watch my videos aren't from the UK, and even those who are from the UK, they're not necessarily local. But yeah, so that was my first lesson, and then she had said to me, on your second lesson we're going to do some more left turns, and we're going to do some right turns, and then, you know, we're going to go on the roads. So in the second lesson, just as promised, she taught me right turns. So right turns were a little bit harder because, you know, you're crossing traffic. I also feel like I got the hang of it, and it was just exciting to see the progress. And where we were learning as well, like, we're still in this really quiet area, and there were loads of parked cars. So sometimes I was kind of turning opposite parked cars, which was, you know, difficult and annoying, but also good to get that experience in early, because if you're always turning in like the most perfect situation, then when it's not a perfect situation, you're gonna be fucked. So yeah, anyway, we did more left turns, and then we did right turns, and then we kind of went out of the area we'd been learning in and did some more left and right turns, and then she let me drive home. And I remember, like, I was ecstatic. I think this was a Wednesday, and I needed to go somewhere afterwards, but I was just like bouncing off the walls about the fact I'd driven home, and it was just incredible, because you're on the roads, and I don't live on a main road, but I live near a fairly main road, and to be driving onto that main road and turning onto it, although she did let me like go straight at a junction, basically go round a roundabout and come back the same way so that I could turn left onto the main road, which was nice, because I think it would have been quite daunting to do a right turn onto it when I'd only learnt right turns that day. But yeah, like it was just thrilling to like drive myself home. So I've been posting about my experience with my driving lessons as they happened on like threads. So I'm just going to sum up bits I missed. Ditching manual for automatic was one of the best decisions I made for myself as a learner, especially being autistic and ADHD. It's still a lot to process and figure out, but I'm, one, making clear progress, and that's motivating me more. Two, minimizing how many new things I'm learning, i.e. learning to drive on the road is one thing, but learning to drive manual is like a whole extra thing. Three, minimizing how many things and movements I need to do, which is maximizing my attention for the road. Maybe if I'd learned in a manual, it would become second nature like people say, but I know that motor skills aren't my strong point, and the less muscle memory I have to form, the better, because even in an automatic, it feels like patting my head and rubbing my stomach times 100. Why work against my weaknesses and spend half of my energy making my feet do unnecessary things when I can just skip that shit and focus that half of my brain on driving safely? So that was my second driving lesson. Very exciting, very excited. For my third driving lesson, it got even more exciting. And daunting and scary. So I came down for my third driving lesson, and I'm putting my shit in the back so that I can get in the passenger seat, because I don't want to accidentally press the dual control. And she basically is like, no, you're getting in this side, pointing at the driver's side. And I was like, oh, I had thought that maybe this would happen because I'd driven home the day before, but starting off your lesson in the car is like a whole different thing, because like you're not warmed up, and like she'd said to me the day before, because I hadn't had a lesson for like a week, that it would take me a while to warm up again, but maybe because I'd had a lesson the day before, I didn't need all that time to warm up. But yeah, like it was daunting, especially because, like I said, I live near a fairly main road, so it's not long before you're faced with that. It is a lot. It was a lot. You know, even now, like, this was my third driving lesson, and I've just had my 7th. And even now, I dread going to that road. But, you know, she clearly believed that I would be fine. And I do realise, like, even now, I still need to trust that ball. So I drove this lesson start to finish, and it was daunting as fuck, but I didn't kill anyone. Being out on the roads also forced me to blend my turns with, like, the rest of my driving. Like, you can't slow down so much or stop unnecessarily just so you can make a turn and just let the pull of the car drive you forward. You need to, like, drive smoothly. It also helped me practice braking smoothly, which is something else I've been trying to work on. In those 2 hours, I got a lot more experience dealing with different spaces and distances, like passing parked cars, going in narrow roads and lanes, and, you know, stopping at the stop line. Like in the beginning, a lot of the time I was stopping way ahead of the stop line. So like before I needed to really be stopped, and then just kind of like having to edge forward. But by the end, I feel like I was starting to judge better where I needed to stop and like how much I needed to brake and all of that kind of stuff. That first lesson on the road also forced me to pay attention for 2 hours, and there was a lot to pay attention to. It did get easier as time went on, but like easier, not easy. At the start of the lesson, I was like barely saying anything. Like everything was just about like looking at the road, and I was anticipating hazards that weren't really my hazards or like anything to do with my driving. Just like when I thought, oh, this car's going to do something anywhere around me, or this person's going to do something, like it wasn't always going to affect me, but I was sitting there thinking, oh, should I brake? I was going quite slowly most of the time, and I was also scared that I wasn't in my lane and I was going to start veering into oncoming traffic. But I was also too scared to check my mirrors, because checking your wing mirrors kind of like you have to take your eyes off the road a bit. By the end of the lesson, I had a lot more experience with different distances, and I was braking more smoothly. I could check my mirrors more routinely without thinking I'm going to kill someone if I glanced away, and I also had a lot more confidence. I made mistakes too, like of course I did. It was my first lesson on the roads. My first mistake was not putting my sunglasses on when I got in that car. And when you put the sun visor down, it kind of blocks half your rear view mirror. And also I just find it really annoying, like having something in the way. It just, I don't know, it kind of makes me feel like I'm driving in a smaller space. I also didn't stop at a zebra crossing when I was trying to stop myself being blinded by the sun, but like thankfully my instructor did. And that did also give me some comfort, like knowing and just remembering and reminding myself that she has a brake and I am hopefully not going to do any real damage. Another mistake I made is that I stopped really suddenly when a light went amber, when I should have just kept going. I also didn't check my rear view mirror when I stopped suddenly, and I'd already crossed the stop line, and it just wasn't a safe time to stop. But to me, I see the light changing and I just panic I'm gonna go through a red light. So I just slammed the brakes basically. I also overtook a car that was dropping someone off without checking my right mirror and like only checking the traffic ahead. But thankfully there was no motorcyclists or anyone trying to overtake as well. And I also found myself doing 27 in a 20 zone, which for someone who started the lesson going like so slowly and feeling like that learner that everyone is stuck behind was pretty amazing. I'm not sure I would guess it's a mistake, but I'm not sure I think it's a bad thing, because it showed me, one, that, you know, I can drive at a higher speed in like a more built up area, but also it showed me how easy it is to speed. And there's been a few times where I found myself going over the speed limit without even realizing, and it's really easy to do, especially like in 20 zones. But you know, I think it was good to have that experience. I also successfully and correctly overtook a bus that lesson, and I remember being like so anxious about doing it, but it needed to be done. Like there was no one coming on the other side, so there was no reason not to. It was just my fear that someone would start coming on the other side, or that I would say it's clear, and then between me saying it's clear and actually going, something would like come up, and you know, like I would be the person on the wrong side of the road. Even now, like this was on my 3rd lesson, still on my 7th lesson, I overtook a bus and I got a bit anxious about it. I did it a lot smoother and I did it without kind of thinking so much about it, but I always prefer that by the time I can overtake a bus, the bus is moving off anyway, so I don't need to. But that's not always the case, and you do have to overtake buses, and it is scary, but you just got to do it anyway. Another highlight of that lesson was that I let someone in because I'm such a kind person, and I think this feels so good because of how many times I've been in the car with someone else and they're like wanting someone to let them in, or they're letting someone else in, and it's kind of like your like random act of kindness on the road or whatever. And obviously it's like, oh yeah, if it's safe to let them in, blah blah whatever, but it still feels good. In that lesson, aside from like, you know, the zebra crossing I almost didn't break out, I felt like I stopped and reacted to pedestrians well, and like I even managed to brake for pedestrians that just walked out into the road. And there was also an occasion where I was going up quite a narrow like high street, and I saw before I had kind of turned in a particular direction that there was someone behind a delivery van, and so I knew that they might walk out, and they did walk out, and I was ready. Towards the end of the lesson, I also managed to have like a 20-minute conversation with my instructor, and you know, like that gave me a lot of confidence because I was still driving and having a conversation. Whereas I'd started the lesson feeling like I can't even say anything, I can barely listen to her directional instructions. But I'd had a whole conversation about like YouTube and TikTok because my driving instructor is on YouTube and TikTok. And it was quite an in-depth conversation about content creation and all that stuff, because I guess it's not every day you meet someone who also makes YouTube videos or anything. And I think this was probably my favorite lesson, not just because it was my first lesson on the roads and it was so exciting, but also because I feel like that's when I kind of started to bond with my instructor. But yeah, so we had like a whole 20-minute conversation about content creation, and I was quite invested in it because I'm quite interested in it. And the road obviously took priority, but I found that I didn't make more mistakes than I had been before. I just maybe didn't correct mistakes that I might have been better at correcting if I wasn't having a conversation. But I think having that conversation actually really helped me as a learner, because it stopped me overthinking everything that I was doing while driving. Before, the road could take priority and I could overthink what's happening on the road. Whereas while I was having a conversation, I didn't have that bandwidth to do all three and overthink. And it showed me that if I can have a conversation that I'm quite invested in while driving and still not kill anyone, then I'm probably not doing as badly as I think, and I can probably relax a little bit. Like, sure, it's maybe not the ideal distraction for a driving lesson, but in real life there will be distractions, and I think it's really good to get used to them from the get-go. Like, you might have kids in the car, you might have other passengers in the car, you might have your sat nav just trying to give you directions, and you've got to be able to pay attention to that or block it out if you don't need to pay attention to that and still be able to drive. And so like, I don't refrain from having conversations with my driving instructor while driving, because I think that's necessary practice. And when I do feel like I need to concentrate, like it happened today where we were doing a roundabout and we were having a conversation and I said, wait, let me just do this roundabout. I don't actually remember what I was talking about or whether I actually said it after the roundabout. I don't think I did. But you know, then the conversation stops. I'm focusing on my roundabout. Like, I know when I need more brain, and I think as a driver, you need to know that you can rely on yourself to make sure you're focused, not on other people to keep you focused. But yeah, by the end of that lesson, I knew what mistakes I was making repeatedly and hadn't corrected, and so needed to focus on next time. And I felt way more confident, excited, and motivated to learn to drive. Sure, I hadn't started maneuvers or anything, but that first lesson on the roads really showed me that driving was within my reach. My fourth lesson was out on the roads again, and it took me a while to get back into it because it had been a few days since my last one, because it was now like the next week. But once I did get back into it, it was a lot smoother than last time. I had definitely improved, and I felt a lot more confident about my positioning and checking my mirrors. I even did a few roundabouts going left, which weren't a super smooth experience, but it was good experience. I also got up to 40 on the A406, which felt like, you know, such a thrill, but also absolutely terrifying. I didn't feel confident enough to do 50 with so many cars about, but it was good practice to navigate subtle curves at speed without being able to slow down that much. In that lesson, I also did some finicky turns, so like there were some turns that were just like not how you practice turns and like going back on themselves or like really tight. And there was one turn where I'd approached too fast and there was an island, so I had to like adjust my steering to make sure I didn't hit the island. I think for me, the thing when I was turning is I'd spent a lot of time at different points in different lessons with people kind of like right behind me and feeling like the slowpoke, especially my first lesson on the roads when I was going super slow. And I think as I was driving on the roads more, I was feeling like, okay, so I shouldn't be slowing down so much for turns. They should blend with my driving. And so I wasn't slowing down enough. But actually, like, I can slow down more and it's completely fine. Like, it's a safer turn, it's a better turn. Actually, today I watched a van do a turn and watched how slowly he did it, and I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. I think it's really easy to feel pressured by people being right behind you when you're a learner and feeling like you are the slow learners, like slowing everybody down. At least for me, that's how I felt in my first couple of lessons on the road, and still do sometimes. But I realised that most of the time I'm going at decent speed and people are just right behind me for whatever fucking reason because they want to sniff my ass. And I just need to kind of like forget about them, aside from if I need to brake. Yeah, if I'm going slowly and there's people behind me, then I probably need to speed up. But I think some of the way I ended up speeding, and this happened to me today, is that I was feeling like, oh, people are right behind me, I need to be going. But I think most of the time I've been going in all right speed and I'm slowing down for the right things, like whether they're turns or hazards or whatever. And people are just unnecessarily on my bumper anyway. And the people on my bumper have just made me second guess myself. And I shouldn't let them do that. That's not to say that I don't feel pressure now, like I still do when people are on my bumper, but often I feel like it's them being in the wrong, not leaving a big enough gap. I also want to make sure that I'm not going at a speed where I don't feel like I have control of the car, like especially if you're sort of in narrow lanes or trying to stay in your lane and amongst cyclists, because when you're driving faster, like the slightest turn one way, like because you think you're just trying to stay in your lane so you don't go into oncoming traffic, it can pull you way too much the other way, and then you're way too close to the curb, or like in the case that happened to me was bollards. If I'm going 25 in a 30 zone, it's because right now I feel like I need to go 25 in a 30 zone, and I will pick up the speed as time comes. And yeah, there are times where I'm just being hesitant and I can pick up speed, but there are also times where I know that, oh, this road is really finicky and there are like some turns, and because it's maybe less built up, people will cross wherever the fuck they please, and I want to be ready and want to know that I'm ready, and I'd rather do that and be slow. And because they're wide roads in the area I'm thinking of, people can fucking overtake me. And sometimes when people have overtaken me, I feel very much like, oh, am I not going fast enough? Even though sometimes I am going like the speed limit. And sometimes it's just like I might not be going the speed limit, but stuff is happening that's making me think it's not appropriate to go the speed limit. And my instructor is often like, oh no, it's fine, you're doing the right speed for right now. Or like, he's speeding. And like, don't get me wrong, there are definitely times where it's me that needs to go faster, but I also want to just balance that with having the control of the car. My instructor doesn't have a second steering wheel, so she can't help us if I veer off the wrong way. I mean, she can grab the steering wheel, but you know what I mean. I also realized in this lesson that I was using the center line and how close I was to it as a guide for whether I'm okay in terms of where I am with the curb and whatever, because looking at your left wing mirror is a lot harder than looking at your right wing mirror. But when there are parked cars, the whole kind of way things are changes, right? You might not necessarily even be completely in your lane, and so you can't use the center line as a guide just to avoid looking at your left wing mirror, like especially if there's no cycle lanes or any of that kind of stuff. You need to be looking at your left wing mirror anyway, and it will happen. Like, your instructor has a brake, your instructor is looking at your wing mirrors, so if there's something you're missing that is big, they will tell you, or they will act, or whatever. But eventually you have to be able to look at all that shit yourself. And I do feel better at looking at my left wing mirror than I did before, and I definitely feel like I'm getting there. And like, my instructor has these little wide mirrors sort of stuck on the wing mirrors, if that makes sense, so that you can see even more further back. But I always forget to look at them, and I've now realized that I can just look at them to see whether I'm in my lane and all of that kind of stuff. At this point, I was generally ending up too close to the curb, either when I turned too much when I turned left, or because I'd naturally like pulled in to let oncoming traffic pass. And I think what I learned in this lesson was kind of also a bit of a life lesson. So basically, there were cars parked on both sides of the road, and there was a bus coming, and I'd like naturally pulled in a bit without necessarily looking to let the bus pass, because I've just kind of panicked. It's a bus and it's only my second lesson on the roads. But my instructor was just like, keep going, because that will make room for him. And so what I took away from this lesson was that sometimes the best way to make room for someone is to keep moving. And I feel like that probably applies to other stuff other than driving. But yeah, it felt very poetic when I realised that sometimes that's not just all you can do, but also the best thing you can do. My 5th driving lesson was also on the roads, but it was like a week after my 4th one, because my instructor had been with a pupil and someone had hit them, so like not their fault, but she'd then been waiting on a courtesy car, so I hadn't had any lessons. So my 5th lesson was not only a week after my 4th one, but it was also in a different car, which I hated. So in this lesson, I navigated some roundabouts with some improvements on the last time, and I got better at checking my left mirror. And I also did some turns from minor roads into major roads, including one without a traffic light. And that was scary, but it's all good experience. And because I was checking my left mirror more, my instructor didn't need to correct me so much for being too close to the curb. And also, when I did the turn from a minor road to a major road, my view was also partially obstructed by a van. So I was turning left, but I couldn't see all the oncoming traffic because there was also like a light around there, I think, as well. And that was good experience, but also, very scary at the time. In this lesson, I started to overthink my steering and like my hand placement while I was steering, which then made me start fucking up my turns, and I wasn't turning right because I was overthinking my steering. And so in the next lesson I did try to address that. But just a note on like being in a different car. I had previously been learning in a Kia Picanto, and the courtesy car is a Dacia Sandero. And it was interesting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because like I said, I am going to have my mum's car, but it's a big car, and we're now thinking that maybe that isn't the right thing for my first car. So in the weekend before, I'd actually been looking at cars and basically ranking them on pretty much how high the seat goes. There were some other factors that were important, but cars whose seats went higher and had more movability were like definitely top of the list. But yeah, I obviously couldn't test drive any cars because I don't have a driving license. So this courtesy car was my only opportunity to drive anything different to what I'd been learning in before. I knew that there would be some difference between different cars, but I didn't realise just how much difference there could be. And like I said, I hated it, and I still do kind of hate it, but I'm more used to it. I've actually now had more lessons on the road with it than I had in the Kia Picanto, but I still hate it. My biggest dislikes of the Dacia Sandero, especially when like compared to the Kia Picanto I'd been learning in before, are that one, the pedals have less resistance, which means you have to press more to make them do something, which can be a bit jerky when you're just trying to accelerate a little bit more. By less resistance, I mean like the Kia Picanto felt like you're putting your foot on a firm sponge, some firm foam, maybe even cake, right? You just gotta press it so lightly to do things and whatever. Whereas the Dacia Sandero, like probably not the fairest comparison, but like akin to the cake and the sponge analogy, feels like treading on a plastic bag that has air in it, and not a lot of air, and it's not the most strong plastic bag. Like it's a cheap one that you get from like a corner shop. And this is kind of the main problem, but I think it's linked to the other problems. And my second biggest dislike is that there seems to be no rhyme or reason to how much you need to press the pedal to go faster. So like when I'm going, say, 20 something and wanting to go more towards 30, it's like sometimes I needed to press it a lot and sometimes I didn't need to press it that much. I think there's also a bit of a delay in that, which I think is because of the smaller engine size. My third biggest dislike is that because the pedal has less resistance, it takes more effort to keep a steady speed. Because with the Kia Picanto, you could kind of press a little bit and like it's quite easy to keep that steady. Whereas with the Dacia Sandero, like you're pressing a little bit, but if you start pressing too much, your speed is increasing because there's not as much resistance to kind of keep you steady. But yeah, like I said, I am getting used to it. It was not a car I looked at when I was looking at cars. It was a car that came up on many lists as a good first car, but I am very glad that I've experienced it now to know that I do not want that car. The sad thing is that I will probably end up doing my test in this car, but then again, it will say something if I can pass the test in a car I hate driving. In my 6th driving lesson, I started to feel a bit more confident. My hesitation had come up in the lesson before, in my 5th lesson, so in this 6th lesson, I really tried to address that. Instead of focusing on my hand placement while steering for my turns, I started to focus on just making the turn, knowing that if I know I can make the turn and I get practice at making the turns, then I can fix the hand placement later. Yes, it is hard if you pick up bad habits trying to fix them, but I also think by trying to do everything at once and overthinking my hand placement, I wasn't getting the hand placement right or making the turn well. So it was kind of just making me feel like I was going nowhere, even though I was in a car. But yeah, thinking about my hand placement too much the day before had made me sacrifice my steering, which had then made me more hesitant for subsequent turns. And I think that really paid off because I made better turns in that lesson, and instead of being too slow like I had been in the past, I was often too fast. I still made those turns decently, but it just meant my instructor had to cover the brake in case I didn't steer enough to actually make the turn. I think once I get my speed and steering right, it will be a lot easier to adjust my hand placement because I'll already know how to turn and how much to turn. So I won't be trying to learn it all at once, and it will just be moving my hands. I'm still getting used to the road, and every corner is different. To me, I'm thinking about this like anatomy and getting experience dealing with different anatomies and learning how to handle them, just like I did with piercing. In driving, it's just getting used to different anatomies of the curb. Some bend more than others, some go back on themselves, some have more rounded edges, and some are opposite islands, which makes turns narrower. The more driving I do, the more experience I'll get, and the easier it will be to navigate different things, even if I'm in a new place. In my 6th lesson, I also did a better job of not getting too close to the curb and parked cars than I had done previously, which gave me a lot of hope because that had been my longest standing mistake. And we also did some more roundabouts, so they felt a bit less scary. In my 6th lesson, I also learned my first maneuver, which was reversing 2 car lengths, and it wasn't too bad. No one died, but I think the others, which are parking in a bay and parallel parking, are going to be a lot harder. I still made mistakes too, like stopping beyond the stop line in a cycle box, but I think generally in that lesson I felt a lot more confident, and I think that was mostly because I actively tried to be less hesitant. Aside from doing my first maneuver, that lesson didn't feel that exciting, but the progress definitely did. One thing I don't think I touched on thoroughly enough in this video is steering. And for me, I think my struggles with steering tie into being autistic and struggling with motor movements. So I am right-handed, and I'm finding myself doing most of the steering moves with my right hand doing like the bulk of the work. And this means that when I'm doing something like a full lock to the right or a full lock to the left, I'm generally doing it in more moves than I'm supposed to be doing it in. And I'm also generally doing it slower. And basically, I think I'm struggling to coordinate both of my hands to like work together to pass the steering wheel between themselves. And yeah, like I think it's quite difficult to explain, but I kind of think it's probably not just me, and other people might have had this. I know steering is one of the hardest things, and I know with time and practice I might get better and improve, and right now I'm just more focusing on doing the turns however that comes out. But I think for me that was part of the issue with manual, in like coordinating different parts of my body to do things together rather than just being like, okay, right foot does this. Like I quite like in an automatic that the right foot does everything. It's kind of easier for me. But yeah, coordinating different things to happen in some kind of synchronicity is really hard for me. And I kind of struggle with this in like mirror signal maneuver, like trying to coordinate everything to happen at once in the right way. Like, you know, you've got to look, you've got to signal, you've got to do the move. And for me, I'm not a very coordinated person. I do hope that this will improve and be easier as time goes on, but I am struggling a lot more than I thought I would. And I am managing at times to just kind of make up the speed or make up the movement with the way I'm steering. And I am crossing my hands less than I was before when I started kind of just steering how it worked for me. But I think steering is one of the things you can get a minor for, and I'm just finding it a lot harder to try and make myself steer in the right way, if that makes sense. And when I practiced right and left turns, like in the very beginning, it was all like full lock that way and like needing to do quick turns, whereas on the road when you're at speed you don't always need to do a full lock, and that can be confusing sometimes when I was then trying to position myself how I had learned and it wasn't always working out. So now I'm focused on making the turns and I need to improve my steering in the next month or so, but I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to successfully steer the way I'm being taught to steer, because coordinating my arms to do things together is just really difficult for me. I didn't realize how difficult it was until I started learning to drive, but yeah, I'm finding that really hard. Another thing that I don't know if it's just a matter of getting used to it or not is just realizing that everything in your mirrors is reflected. And so like when I look in my rear view mirror, realizing that, you know, what is on the right of my rear view mirror is on the right of me behind me, because in my mind I'm almost like turning it around so that what's on the right in my rear view mirror is on the left behind me, if that makes sense. Like I'm treating it more like it's a picture from behind me, but it's a reflection. For some reason my brain is struggling to kind of grasp that, and same sometimes with my wing mirrors and like figuring out, okay, the people in my wing mirrors are generally next to me, right, rather than being behind me. It's just a bit of a thing that I'm finding confusing and struggling with, but I'm hoping that with time I will get used to these things, and hopefully in another month or so I will look back on this thinking like, oh, I had no need to worry. But the steering thing, I think more so is the thing that I think I'm potentially going to struggle with for a while. I just thought I would add that in because I realised I hadn't. So my 7th driving lesson was today, the day I'm filming this, and it has now been about a month since I started learning to drive. And like I said at the start, I am hoping to have a test in about another month. So I am about halfway through, supposedly. I'm not sure I feel halfway through, but I'm not sure I really feel not halfway through. I think a lot of it will be about being more confident. And after today, I did feel more confident. Today turns felt a lot easier and slow turns didn't make me panic too much. I overtook buses when I needed to, and I also didn't overtake them when I didn't need to, because I still don't like doing that, but I can do it. And I think I am getting a lot better at just knowing what I need to be doing rather than always needing to be told. It was also raining today, so it was good experience learning to drive in the rain, because even if it doesn't rain on the day of my test, it will rain at some point and I need to know how to drive in the rain. I didn't like driving in the rain. I will say that. I'm really not a fan. The rain makes checking your wing mirrors really difficult. Like, you need to check whether something you see is there or if it's a raindrop, and whether a raindrop is obscuring something you should see. And it's just really annoying because instead of just being able to see the detail of what you need to see, you're seeing all these raindrops as well. Today it felt like checking my wing mirrors took a lot more attention and even time, because I needed to kind of navigate those obstacles that are raindrops. And because I needed more attention and time, I didn't always feel like I had the time or could give the attention to check them. Like, obviously before I'm turning, I'm checking them, but to just check them, to check whether I'm in my lane and give myself that bearing of where I am in space felt quite difficult. I also had to pull to the side for 2 emergency vehicles today, and that was daunting. Not as daunting as I thought it would be, but still daunting. It also reminded me of my takeaway from another lesson, which was that sometimes the best way to make space for someone is to just keep moving, because my instinct was just to stop where I was, and I did, and it was in the way. My instructor reminded me that, planning is key, and that, instead of just stopping where I was, if I kept going just ahead of me, there was somewhere on the left that I could pull in, and that would have created that space. Today I also did a 4th exit on the roundabout, which I can't remember exactly, but I think it was past 12 o'clock. I kind of feel like it would be a lot for them to have 4 exits before 12 o'clock, so it must have been. But yeah, that was exciting. For once, I was also the person complaining about a slowpoke because I was stuck behind someone going 30 on the A12, and I don't know how to change lanes yet, so I just had to keep behind them, and I kept having to slow down. The speed limit was 50. I wasn't going 50 because I couldn't go 50. I haven't actually gone 50 yet, but I feel confident to go up to 40 on those roads, and I feel like it says something if I think someone's too slow. But because the road curves quite subtly in places, it was just more experience doing those subtle curves at higher speeds while staying in my lane, because I was going slow enough that I felt like I could look in my wing mirrors. When I was on the A406, I said when I got off it that, I have no idea if I was in my lane all of that time. I was just focusing on not crashing into the wall because of the subtle curves. So it is good practice to do those subtle curves because they do freak me out at times. Today I also learned my second maneuver, which was bay parking. It went okay. It didn't go amazingly. I think there were things making it harder. Firstly, the lines of the bays were faded as fuck. Secondly, the rain meant what lines were left on the floor were kind of obscured or less visible by puddles in places. I think bay parking got a lot easier when I started trusting my instincts over markers for certain things. So some markers are really helpful, but other markers, because I am quite small and I have a different viewpoint to other people, they're not always the same to what it is for most people. So I was reversing into a bay and my instructor was saying that when my right wing mirror is over the front line of the bay next to me, then I know that I've reversed back enough, basically. And for me, my viewpoint is different because I am so short, and so if I line those two up, I am out of my bay at the back end because I have to come more back for that to happen, because if you're taller, I don't know, the angle is different. I don't know how to explain it. And once I started relying on my instincts, it did go better, but then she also showed me different markers I could use that weren't height dependent. But also with other things, knowing when I've kind of straightened up, I realized that if I just, pause and look forward, I'm quite good at judging that. Whereas trying to judge it looking back, I really struggle with. But you're supposed to look back when you reverse, so that's what I've been doing. But actually, if I just hold the brake and then turn around and have a look at where I am, it's a lot easier. So we did this in a fairly empty car park, and she says that's how it will be for the test. But I cannot imagine having to reverse into a bay when there are cars parked either side. She says that I won't have to do that on my test, but obviously I'm gonna have to do that eventually. But yeah, I cannot imagine doing that. But then part of me also wonders whether that might be easier, because instead of trying to look at lines on the floor that are kind of faded and shit, you're looking at two things that are also your eye level, so you have a better idea of how close you are, because you're not having to always use your mirrors to look. But also, if they've parked properly, they'll be on their side of the white line of the bay you're parking in, so it shouldn't really be any harder. You just can't fuck up. But yeah, tomorrow I'm gonna learn parallel parking apparently, and I really hope it's okay. But she was saying that the bay parking with the they won't make you bay park between people, that they don't actually make you parallel park between people. It's just maybe a lamppost, or in this distance this is where you're gonna park up or whatever. So that's something. But yeah, I'm really nervous because I used to play parking games a lot, and parallel parking is difficult even on the fucking computer. So yeah, wish me luck. But yeah, that is where I'm at right now with learning to drive. 1 month in, hopefully 1 month out. There is one thing I did want to say that I don't think I have said yet, and I think this is particularly relevant for neurodivergent people. I know my left and right. I don't usually have difficulty with that. And there is one video I have, and it's talking about something completely different. I think it's like my first video talking about unscrewing piercings, and I say in it something like, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. If you don't know your left and right, you shouldn't be getting piercings. And people commented on it about, you know, people with dyslexia having difficulty with that, and I just had no idea. I didn't know I was neurodivergent at the time. I was very ignorant to those things. It was like a 2016 video, and like, not excusing the ignorance, but you know, like, I just had no idea that was a thing. There are also other things like this that I've kind of come to realize. But anyway, left and right, I don't struggle with it. But when I am driving, I sometimes struggle with it. And I didn't think this would be a problem for me, but I think sometimes I just forget. I think also because someone's on the left side of the car, so I don't think of myself as really having a left. But basically, when I'm driving and my instructor is like, oh, turn left here or turn right here, sometimes it takes me a minute to get the right or get the right left in my head. It hasn't been the case yet that I've gone the wrong way, but as someone who didn't think I struggled with this, because I know my left and right, but I know my left and right because when I'm standing like this, like, you know, my arms out, it feels quite obvious. When my hands are on the steering wheel, doesn't feel so obvious. And yeah, that is something that I don't know if it's related to neurodivergence. I don't know if it's just something other people have as well, but I found that I'm repeatedly struggling with that. And I think it feels important because I firstly know that it's related to different neurodivergencies, but two, do not usually struggle with that. So the fact I do feels like something. It's also not just with turning right and left, sometimes it's with lanes. And I'm not actually sure what I can do, you know, like, can I color code right and left in the car so that I can associate, say, blue with left, because I do associate blue with left, to be fair. And I don't know if this is something that will like be easier as I have more experience driving. I don't know if actually it's not as easy for me as I think it is, and I just know cognitively what my right and left are and which one is which. But maybe it takes me longer, even not in a driving scenario, to figure out that shit. And yeah, I just thought it was worth tagging on that, because obviously they are like, you know, turn left at the end of this road, stay in the left lane, and this. And it's one thing when you're trying to figure that shit out and which one is right, which one is left. It's a whole other thing when you're trying to even see where the fucking lanes are, because they're faded as shit. And especially when there ends up being a middle lane. But yeah, I think right now I am feeling fairly confident as a learner. I'm not sure if I feel like, oh, in a month I'll be ready. But I feel like if I'm here in 1 month, I will be further in another month. It might not be as significantly further, because I think some people, like, they have a really steep learning curve and then it kind of evens out. And some people, you know, are slow, then suddenly it clicks. But if I've done this much in a month, where I'm driving on A roads at like 40 miles an hour, sometimes even more, and calling other people slow, then in another month, I should really be ready for a test. But, you know, we'll see. I'm not really sure when this video is going to come out. It might even come out after the next month has passed. Fingers crossed that I do pass whenever my test is, because they're cancellation tests. I won't get a lot of notice for when it is, but I hope I'm ready. I hope I pass. And I know a lot of people do fail their tests, and some people will say that people who pass on the second go are the best drivers, but I am not used to failing tests. It will crush me if I fail a test. But also, I've paid a lot of fucking money to try and get this test sooner, and I think I might have to pay that again if I fail it and fuck it up. But yeah, hopefully it will all be okay. Hopefully I will pass. But yeah, that is the end of this video, and hopefully by the time you see another update on this, I will have passed my test. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Wish me luck in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Basically, to cut a short story, hopefully even shorter, back in 2012, I had just started to learn to drive. I was 17. Oh God. Can you like decide what you're doing? No. Can you not? Please. Basically, to cut up cookie, no, please. Leave the tripod where it is. I had a point. So last summer I did actually start making the effort to learn to drive, and I did actually book my theory test. Hold on a second, I don't think this is gonna work. Cookie, go sit in the sun. Look, the sun's come out. Cookie, don't move the tripod. So I did my theory in July 2024. It's currently, when I'm filming this, February 2024. I don't know what day it is. So in the next lesson, just as promised, I'm gonna sneeze. I didn't promise you that.